combination is a secondary source of variation in the sense that when you reshuffle the deck, you reshuffle what's already there. We're going to talk strictly about sexual reproduction. I talked about how we would concentrate on that, not asexual reproducing organisms. And so sexual reproduction combines alleles from two different parents for fertilization. There are different forms. Inbreeding. So inbreeding basically is sexual reproduction between two genetically similar individuals of the same species. The problem with inbreeding is you increase the genetic load, which is the potential for negative gene complexes to be expressed phenotypically, which is deleterious to your survivability and your reproductive success. And it also decreases the amount of variation in the population. And we know that's bad because if the environment changes, you have less of an arsenal to deal with the change. So an example would be this. I have to make a caveat here because I don't know who these people are. I just wanted to find people who look similar, so it's like a ripping up.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, so if they're, I have no idea whether they're inbreeding or not. I apologize if you know them or anything. It's nothing personal, okay? So that's an example of a human species, and then something like this in the middle is a cheetah. So cheetah are heavily prone to inbreeding practices because of what we've done to them. So the cheetah have been bottlenecked in terms of sequestering them in particular type habitats, game preserves, overhunting. So in these game preserves, they can no longer migrate. Who you mate with, whoever happens to be handy. And in many cases, that's brothers and sisters, father, whatever it might be. That's all that you have. That means that you have inbreeding going on, genetic loads go up, and they express all kinds of negative phenotypes. They're small, they're sickly, they have low sperm counts, they show hip dysplasia, they're prone to all kinds of chemical, genetic, they're prone to all kinds of diseases in the environment. Their immune system responses are quite decreased. The cheetah today is a pale imitation of the cheetah in the past. All right. Over here we have elephant seal, southern elephant seal. We talked about these guys, right? Hunted almost to the point of extinction. How many animals? 20 animals. What do you think the genetic variation is within this group? Tiny. They're almost exactly the same, animal to animal. It's amazing. A disease hits them, they kill 100% of them because the variation is too small among the group. Even though there's many individuals now, 100,000 animals or something like that, doesn't mean their genetic variation is high. The number of individuals in the population is high, but their genetic variation is quite low. Crossbreeding. It's the opposite. In this case, it's sexual reproduction between two genetically dissimilar individuals of the same species. Exactly the opposite. What does it do? It decreases the potential of the genetic load to be expressed, and it increases the amount of variation in the population. So basically, these are kinds of differences. This is why, remember I talked before how differences within the population are actually positive things up to a certain point before that breaks down, and this is what it's getting at. This is my example of that. For all I know, they're the inbreeding couple. I have no idea. They're just ripped off of your So that's the basic idea of it. So this would be a good thing from a variation perspective. Inbreeding would be a negative thing. Sexual selection kind of falls within this as well, right? And so basically in sexual selection, you have traits that are being favored and they're advantageous for respect to survival and reproduction just because mates like them. This is an interesting one. So the reason that you basically have a trait, and that trait is in high frequencies, is because one or the other, female or male, prefers that particular trait. The trick here is often the trait can depress the survivability of an organism. But remember, when we talk about fitness, it's just not survivability, it's what? Reproductive success. So as long as one's going down, as long as the other does what? Goes up, it'll still balance out. So you can decrease overall survivability as long as your reproductive success comes up to balance it out. And that's how sexual selection often works. So it is a non-random mating. It can both be intrasexual and intersexual in terms of how it is actually driven. So a nice example is the flamingo. So have you ever seen flamingo close up? I'm trying to say flamingo? Peacock. No more drinking before class. Peacock. So, I'm like, oh, well, peacock. So, how many of you see the peacock? All right. So the male peacock is highly ornate, right? It has all these crazy feathers and this big tail fan. And have you ever seen they vibrate it and they do this crazy dance? heard them make their call?
Yeah.
It's a crazy call, right? It doesn't even sound like it comes out of an animal. It's this really weird, eerie thing, and it can project for a mile or more in some cases, depending on the condition. You ever see the peahen?
Wait.
You're like, no, I've never seen the peahen. There's a reason, because she doesn't want you to see her. She's this little indescript brown bird, basically. And so he has all this junk on. Now, the interesting thing about that is all that coloration, the blues and the greens and all the behaviors, when that fan is big and intact, his reproductive success is amazingly high. But he gives up something for that success. What is it?
Mobility.
Mobility, speed, which makes what? Is much more prone to predation. So he gets picked off 50 to 1 versus the hen. Because think about it. I have this giant thing. Whenever I fan it, I'm making a signal to the female that I'm reproductively ready and I'm fit. If I could invest all this energy in all this garbage, I have a lot of energy to dispense, right? I'm not physically, but structurally fit and evolutionary fit. However, the problem is when I do that fan, what else do I say? You might as well have a giant thing that says "eat me" on it, right? Because you're advertising yourself that every predator are all around, and that call goes out in every direction, which brings the predators in. So there's a definite cost in survivability given the expression. A really neat experiment was done with peacocks. What they did was, it's kind of cool when you think about it, but it's actually a really great experiment for showing the effects of sexual selection in terms of reproductive success. What they did was they took male peacocks and they would snip feathers off of the tail. And they had different grades of it. You take 1, 2 off, no change in reproductive success. But then you started to see as you took more feathers off, the reproductive success of the bird started to go down. They got to a certain point where the female hens would refuse to mate with the male. So they would do all the right things, but they didn't have the feathers to express it, and they wouldn't be able to mate. So they showed a strong, direct correlation, right, between the structure of the feathers, the feather count, their vibrancy, and reproductive success. This is a fiddler crab over here. They have this big claw in the front. It's completely useless for anything really from a food gathering perspective, and it's mostly this display thing, and they basically wave it up and down like this, right? And it's way to basically, again, display. If I have all the energy to put into this thing, I'm very fit from an evolutionary perspective, so that energy burned. And so they can signal the females with it, and then there's one other purpose that it has. So when they lure a female, the female comes into the burrow, and then what they do is they ram it into the burrow wall like this to prevent her from escaping. But it also has another thing, which is to prevent other males from coming in. And that's important. So the bigger it is, the better your wedge is, and you can prevent other males from coming into the burrow to try and take your mate. So it's very effective. What's the negative aspect of it, however? You get higher reproductive success, the bigger your claw, but
Slow down.
you get slowed down. You can't run fast with it, which means birds will do what? They will eat you at a much higher rate than crabs that have a small claw. So again, you're sacrificing your survivability, but you're increasing your reproductive success, and they end up balancing out. Human beings are not removed from anything like this. So again, human behaviors are really an interesting thing to study, because we cover up all our basic biology with all the cultural stuff, and we layer it all on top of it, but all the biology is still there if you strip off the surface. And I always like to look at human behavior, physiology, and morphology from that perspective, because it's really interesting to do. And so human beings display sexual selection all the time, right? So what would be a classic example of? You ever heard something about, they're not my type?
Yeah.
That's sexual selection. Potentially, you can mate with anybody successfully from the opposite sex and have offspring as long as all the reproductive parts work and everything like that, right? It's not a problem. But you're selecting for given individuals based on something like hair color, eye color, or some trait, or some weird media thing you were exposed to, or some way your parents screwed you up when you were young. All that stuff comes into play in basic sexual selection. So there are certain things that we view as valuable, right? So for instance, like this guy right here, he's made $1 billion, yes? His acting is debatable. Right? But yet he's made $1 zillion because he has traits that are desirable in a population that are looking at things like that, right? This individual over here has also made $1 billion, but in a different way. You guys ever seen that movie? It's a great movie. It's an old movie, but if you want to laugh, go view it. They both display survivability, but in terms of reproductive success, who'd probably do it better? Probably Gosling, right? Over. That's Napoleon Dynamite. It's definitely a viewing mandatory. Start your homework. You read Napoleon, and then you go teach evolutionary theory. Let's talk about sexual dimorphism. So the outcome often of sexual selection is because certain traits are selected for by one mate or the other, female or male, what you often see is then over time a separation in traits. And this leads to sexual dimorphism. So what you see then is sexually reproducing organisms have different distinct male or female phenotypes, very common in males and in birds, less so common in other organisms. So here's an example of differences in gorilla size. You guys ever seen silverback male gorillas? They're gigantic, 800 pounds, big giant animals, and the females are relatively small next to them. Really different traits, okay? In the middle here, you have ducks. They're mallard ducks. Which one do you think is the male? The one with the bright green head. In hunting season, who dies 10 to 1?
Bright green head.
The bright green head one does, okay? But again, he's using those characteristics to display thickness. This is actually a backflip of that. Which one's the big one and which one's the small one?
Biggest, yeah.
The female's the big one because in reptiles, females have to carry what? Eggs. And that's the difference. So her size is much larger than the male's. And she actually dies at a higher rate because she's slower and bigger and easier to climb. So when we think about this idea, this is a form of recombination. We're moving alleles around in different ways via this selection. So non-random mating then selects for alleles for preferred traits that prevail over generations. Females in many of these bird and mammal examples are often the selection agents of particular traits. Human beings are exactly the same way. We just talked about that. Here's another example here. So anybody recognizes the world's largest monkey? You know what that is? Mandrill. And they are big, and they're strong, and they're aggressive. Would you ever want to insult the mandrill? No, because they are about 4 times your strength. They will tear you to pieces, and they have a set of fangs that you would not believe. But he's advertising. What is he saying? Blues again. Here's the thing. We take blue for granted as a human species. We make stuff blue. We have pigments all over the place. There's a reason why blue is such a color that's very successful. Human beings love blue. Most animals love blue. The reason we take it for granted is because the sky is blue and water is blue. But when you look around the rest of the world, blue is actually quite a rare color terrestrially. Have you ever seen birds like jays and crows? You ever take a look at their nest? What's it filled with? Blue junk. They grab it and they hoard it. It's really a weird thing to see. So in this case right here, you have a blue bird paradise. Who's the nondescript brown one?
Female.
That's the female. So in this case, the traits that have been selected for are the blue coloration. He's laying blue feathers down in front of her, and then he's forced to do this ridiculous dance. She's judging him the whole way. And if he makes a mistake anywhere along the line, see ya. Doesn't get the mate. So all those traits are being selected for. Hybridization is another interesting one. So hybridization is a form of crossbreed, but in this case it's sexual reproduction between 2 different species. Not different individuals within the same species, but between 2 different species. This usually does not result in success. It can, but it usually does not. By the vast majority of times it does not. So in this particular case, it usually results in infertility, which means a low sperm or egg count, or sterility, which means no viable sperm or egg. A classic example of this is the mule. So the mule is the domestic product which is generated by us. It does not occur naturally at all. It is a forced biological product. All right? So what is it the cross of? Donkey and horse. Why the hell would we do that? We wanted something out of it. So here's the thing. Horse has some really great characteristics. What are the characteristics we like about the horse?
Strong.
They're fast. What else? They're big and they can carry us. What's the problem with horse? What's the problem? They get tired. They don't have much endurance. They're sprinters. That's why when you take a look at a racetrack, quarter mile, right? Nothing. Quarter mile, right? So half a mile. They're not having endurance. They can run like hell fast, but they don't last. So that's a trait we don't like. Because we want something that's big, right? Fast, but also strong. Well, when you look at a donkey, they're not what? They're not big. They're not fast, but they sure are what? Strong. They have incredible endurance. So for their unit body mass, they are incredibly strong and carry tremendous amounts of weight. You ever seen with all that stuff stacked up on top of them? It's no big deal. They're super strong animals, and they can go on forever. So the odds are, well, let's make an animal that's big, strong, has tons of endurance, we'll breed them together. That's exactly what they got. And that's what the mule is. The only thing that stinks about a mule is what? What's that? Well, there's problems with them in terms of definitely the reproductive sex, but personality-wise, they're stubborn. That's one of the traits that sometimes you see with mules. They kind of like to do their own thing. But besides that, that's kind of a minor thing because you can carry tremendous loads on them. They last forever. They're really short-footed. They're big. You can ride them. You can pack gear on them. But one of the problems that happens is the mule itself, the male is completely sterile. No viable sperm. The females, interestingly enough, are infertile. They have low egg counts. But there's no viable sperm in the male to actually generate a successful reproductive event. So that means all mules today are the result of what? Artificial fertilization. Without us, there's no mule. Okay? Here's something else. Now that was something, depending on your philosophy, whether it was successful or not. From a product standpoint, it's successful. From an ethical standpoint, you can argue. Right? This, however, for me, fails at both. What is that?
Liger.
It's a liger. Lion, tiger. Sometimes you hear it referred to as the Taiwan. Stupid, right? So this is a cross between lion and tiger. So my first question is, why? And there's one reason why. It's cool. For show. So often this thing was produced as a way to lure more customers to the circus or the zoo or whatever it was, just so people could ogle. The problem with it is the traits that are expression of both ostracize it from both societies. And so they can't live in a lion society, they can't live in a tiger society, and often since the blend is unpredictable, they can't live with themselves. They'll kill each other because the traits are expressed in different ways. So they are forced to live in isolation, but they're a social animal. So what do you think happens to it? They get into depression and they go nuts because that's what happens when you isolate social animals. So from my perspective, why the hell do you do that? One thing you should realize as a biologist, and you should answer this question a lot, is the ethics of biology. We have so much cool stuff in biology and things we can do that we often say, can I do it? But the real question should be what? Should I do it? Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do that thing, right? Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. And so I'm always kind of cognizant of things like this in terms of biology. We have great power as biologists, right? But we can also do just as much damage or more so than we can do in terms of positive contributions to this world and society. That to me is a waste. I don't like things like that. All right. Well, in populations, you can actually maintain two or more alleles, and that's referred to as a balanced polymorphism. This is where two or more alleles are for a trait in a population persist over time. Non-identical alleles for a trait are maintained at frequencies typically greater than 1%. And those frequencies can shift over time, but they always return to the same value. Remember the same thing about stabilizing equilibrium in ecology? It's the same basic idea. You have these two or more alleles, and they're kind of in this balance. They're in balance. They're stable over time. A great example of this is sickle cell anemia. All right, this is a genetic disease that is common in human beings. And so when we look at this disease, we can express it as HbS, That's the mutant form of hemoglobin. What is hemoglobin again? It's the pigment that does what?
Oxygen.
Carries oxygen.
It carries oxygen and CO2. It's a facilitator molecule, right? It basically increases the operational efficiency of the lungs to move oxygen in and out and CO2 out. So you want this thing to be in good shape, because if it's not, well, you're not respiring. I mean, you're not respiring this way, and you're not cellularly respiring effectively either. So it's a big deal. Now, in HBS individual is homozygous dominant, and they're basically, homozygous recessive, and they're going to develop a sickle cell anemia. What's the problem with it? Well, this is normal blood cells right here. They're biconcave in nature. What does that mean? They dipped on either side. There's a purpose for that. They've lost the nucleus to do it. But what does that shape give them? More surface area for the attachment of CO2 and oxygen, right? So that's the purpose of that. But the sickle cell mutation causes the biconcave disc-like shape to mutate into this sickle cell thing like that. It has less surface area, therefore, it can't carry oxygen and CO2 nearly as effectively. The other problem it is, blood is moving through pipes. Your entire body is a piping system. I'm sure you all have clogged pipes at home. When you have a heart attack, you got a clogged pipe. When you have a stroke, you clog the pipe. And so what happens is, the shape of that is conducive for moving through the pipes cleanly. What if you have pointed ends? They get snagged, they stick, and where you stick, you will cause a blockage, and the blockages result in death, stroke, heart attacks. Okay? All right. Now, HBA individuals are homozygous dominant. They show the normal biconcave condition with a clean blood shape morphologically throughout the entire system. And HBS is a heterozygote. They have a combination of both. They have normal biconcave red blood cells, and they have sickle cells in operation as well. Now, when you take a look at the frequency of this particular allele, HBS, in the tropical and subtropical regions of Africa and Asia and South America, you'll notice this big red band. Okay? It's much higher than expected. About 1/3 of the people, the population, has HBS, they're heterozygote. Would you consider HBS to be maladaptive?
Yeah.
Absolutely. From our perspective, it's completely maladaptive. If you have it, it clogs up your blood system, your circulatory system is not going to run as efficiently, and you're much more prone to stroke and heart attack. It's a maladaptive trait that decreases your survivability. All right? Why the hell is 1/3 of the population of human beings in these areas carry it then? It's maladaptive. What should happen generation to generation? It should go down. What should go up? HBA should increase every generation, but it doesn't. So next time we meet, we're going to talk about